They Are Billions is a real-time strategy game built for purists. Despite being presented within an intriguing steampunk world with almost cartoony visuals, this facade hides a considerably challenging game. Developer Numantian Games first released it in early access through Steam back in 2017, but at the time it only featured a map-based survival mode. The game took on its campaign form in 2019, making it more accessible to strategy fanatics and general gamers alike. So the premise is that a few decades from now, the world is overrun with zombies. The how and the why is drip-fed to you throughout the campaign, but suffice to say, billions have fallen to the plague. One mighty city somewhere in North America has fortified itself in a giant crater that has allowed it to stave off the threat thus far. You're introduced to its mildly patronising and armour-clad leader Quintus Crane at the start of the game in an introductory scene that is, well, let's just say it was made on a budget.
Okay, I'll give you a chance. Listen carefully.
He has selected you, his faceless general, to start colonising locations beyond the city in a bid to expand the empire, thus re-establishing a human presence in the world and reacquiring forgotten technologies along the way.
Sounds good.
What started as a fairly forgettable premise actually grew on me considerably as the game continued because, fantasy element aside, your mission and the subsequent levels actually make sense when you consider how a real colonial empire might expand. The concept of an almost immeasurable number of enemies that continue to appear and throw themselves at your defences doesn't require much suspension of disbelief once you're on board with the general concept of the game. As with any of these isometric games, if you have to stare at the visuals for hours on end, you want the world to be engaging visually, lest you tire of the visuals before you get bored of the gameplay. From the cosy cottages with their glowing windows, giant revolving gears sticking out of buildings, and steam contraptions popping out every which way, the world is saturated in a sort of warm and comfy steampunk aesthetic that presents a stark contrast to the otherwise infested lands that spill out beyond your colony's perimeter. As the story goes, having been cut off from the outside world, the surviving empire has de-evolved on a technology level, which serves to explain the merging of the past and future technologies, more commonly referred to as steampunk. At its core, They Are Billions takes its cues from traditional city-building games, which many gamers will be familiar with, but the method in which you evolve your colony from the start to the end of each level, as well as the overall evolution of your capabilities as the game progresses, is apt and pretty novel. So as you start any new mission, you'll be introduced to your trusty mansion, and don't ask how it gets there, it just does, as well as the true unspoken hero of the story, this badass locomotive that apparently thunders over hostile land and over untended railway tracks to arrive on the dot every day with an unending supply of recruits from the central city. And you can't even click on this thing, I really want to see its stats. Expansion pack, anyone? Anyway, thanks to this train delivering you the daily necessities, you start with a few workers and a bit of gold. With this gold, you can establish tents, hunting or fishing cabins, and sawmills, the building blocks of any new colony. Once the tents are built, we always start with 3, the daily train populates them with workers. Workers populate the buildings and also bring in gold. Hunting and fishing lodges provide food, and when you then build them, sawmills will begin to generate wood. The placement of all of these defining the first few minutes of playtime on every mission. From here, you can build a wood workshop allowing for the development of wooden cottages, amongst other things, as well as a military centre to start producing much-needed soldiers. You might wonder why the ability to produce advanced lodgings doesn't arrive with the colony, but it stands to reason that R&D would actually need to be conducted first as you expand through different types of terrain. The game leaves some of these things up to the imagination, but I found it all fitted neatly into the game's narrative. So now you have these cosy glowing cottages that can house more workers, but the catch is they need more energy and food, thus encouraging the growth of infrastructure as you cater to the growing needs of a larger colony. Accessing these areas is achieved by powering them via Tesla towers. A simple but effective mechanic that compels a slow but steady expansion for the epicenter of your colony. Every map features deposits of stone, iron, and usually gold and oil as well, most of which is usually just a little out of reach and requires some housekeeping of the local zombie population before quarries can be placed down within the relative safety of your home space. And I mean relative. Once stone is trickling into your reserves, a stone workshop can be placed down, which then unlocks the stone house, a far tougher and more roomy abode that maximises the number of colonists that can live within a 4-tiled space. And as anybody who's heard of the 3 Little Piggies knows, building a stone house is worth its weight in gold if you don't want wolves or indeed zombies tearing it down. So the progression of material usage within each level doesn't imply the ages-long development of your people like it did in, say, Age of Empires, but rather the simple necessity of harvesting the surrounding area for resources and so on before more concrete infrastructure can be laid down. After repeating this process a few times over a few different levels, you'll get into a comfortable rhythm of knocking them out. But of course, it's not the resource hunting or indeed base management that'll cause you any real bother. It is, and always will be, the zombies. Just a single enemy wandering into your camp and reducing the life bar of a building to nil will result in its infected occupants spilling out and spreading to the next building and so on. This continues at an exponential rate, and in my experience, once you hear that gut-wrenching message of
The colony is under attack.
it almost always spells the end of your colony from the moment it occurs. If, through sheer luck, you happen to have fast-moving rangers or maybe soldiers in close proximity, the outbreak can be suppressed. But by its very nature, if enemies got in, then you left a hole, and that is the mistake that'll cost you the level, not so much a failure to reach the outbreak in time. Learning to close those holes really is the name of the game, and as I continue to master this, I found the number of times I failed reduced considerably. Manually restarting the level before your command center falls is a regular occurrence. I like to think of it as bowing out gracefully. But really it's because watching your carefully constructed colony succumb to screams of little bastards cut loose is a pretty painful experience. Before it all goes wrong, you'll start with a handful of rangers, and depending on what skill trees you pursue, you will in time acquire a couple of soldiers and a sniper to aid in this task from the outset. You only need rangers in the early levels, but as the game marches on, the soldiers will become more necessary. The speed of the rangers actually makes them ideal for patrol duty, as they'll stop enemies in their tracks upon discovery, and after dispatching them, will continue to cross the map with haste. Soldiers and the sniper are better suited for slow, systematic clearing of areas. As you push the enemy back and clear a larger space for your colony, the patrol paths of your rangers can be tactically repositioned. The shorter the path, the more effective they'll be, because a long path means that they can get held up by an enemy while another section of their route becomes compromised. That is definitely something to keep your eye on, and will be responsible for a number of restarts early game. Once you expand the map enough to identify suitable bottlenecks, you can place down walls and gates and further secure the colony from wandering zombies, and only then can you breathe a little easier. The specifics of this will vary map to map, but largely remains a similar rinse and repeat methodology. As the campaign progresses, you'll have more incentive to act with speed, as zombies occasionally arrive in little groups without warning, but for the serious threats the game is kind enough to provide you with a countdown timer. Assuming you're new to the map, which of course you will be on your first campaign playthrough, the other half of the equation which will demand far more of your time will be the actual hands-on removal of the zombie threat. Fog of War obscures the nature of the challenge, and any given area can be hiding anything from a juicy mineral deposit covered by a handful of slow-moving zombies, to a town infested by literally hundreds of enemies, and I mean hundreds. As a result, micromanaging your soldiers is not just advised but an absolute necessity. Setting your soldiers to auto-attack using the chase command is par for the course. You can't be expected to define their every step, but take your eye off the ball for honestly just a few seconds and you will curse yourself, because there's no provision to dictate that they don't run headlong into clearly dangerous areas and take on an entire horde by themselves. And this will happen, and you will curse yourself as you catch them too late, and despite the frustration, no doubt before long it'll happen again. A lack of sensible AI for your troops might seem like an oversight, but in reality it really is just another challenge to master within the game. Otherwise these soldiers would tackle the hardest part of the game for you. The game is unforgiving, but knowing and understanding the pros and the cons of each different unit type teaches you to leverage their strengths and protect them from themselves when facing the unknown. The core units, rangers, soldiers and snipers, are available almost from the start, and further into the game more types become available through the upgrade tree, all of which can be seen from the beginning if you care to look. Their movement speed, attack damage and hit points make them all fit for different tasks, and developing an understanding of these as you play is a fun learning curve. Although the sniper might be excellent at clearing zombies from a distance, the overpowered nature of his rifle makes him less effective than a soldier over a period of time. However, if you pair him with a soldier and set him to attack the most powerful enemy, he can keep the more dangerous enemies at bay while the soldier clears the chaff. And that's just one potential combination. Do this for long enough and the unit becomes a veteran, gaining a significant stat boost and a colour change, in effect giving you a whole nother unit to contend with as different challenges come up throughout the level. Each unit type features a distinct personality shared amongst them. The soldiers are friendly and obedient.
Do you need me?
The sniper depressed but focused.
I need to explode a skull.
And the ranger is sarcastic.
Aren't there other units to bother?
The slight elephant in the room is one particular line uttered by the ranger, the only female unit in the game.
So tired. Last night was amazing.
Sexualizing characters within a fantasy setting is sometimes half the fun. I mean, clues in the name, but the nature of this particular line seemed a bit weirdly out of place amongst all the others, even if you are supposed to take it with a pinch of salt. A later upgrade, Thanatos, a mech-enabled super soldier, is modelled around a sleepy drunk. And although he says amusing things like,
Oh, not sleeping, just resting my eyes,
handling multiple instances around the map does sort of take you out of the experience a little bit, because it seems like he has a very distinct personality, except now there are 10 of him, covering their faces like this guy, and having them say generic things like, Ashes to ashes. Strikes me as a far better design choice when you consider that no unit is ever supposed to be a lone operator. It just kind of feels like some of the characters were better developed than others, but that only really applies to their personalities. Part of the premise of the larger campaign is that you're hunting for ancient technology as your colony expands across the land. These technologies come in the form of research points, which can be poured into your choice of upgrade or skill tree. Sometimes it's more resources, sometimes it's a new type of unit, and other times it's an entirely new defensive structure. Whatever it is, you'll rely on them heavily as new types of enemies are added to the roster of threats that you have to defend against. Many of these buildings also require more resources to first develop and then build, so as your skill tree grows, so will the playtime of the levels, sometimes becoming hours in length depending on how much you ride the pause button.
Technology research finished.
You receive some research points for simply clearing a standard mission, but most of these will be uncovered by your chosen hero. Chilus, Celus, Calus? Calus. Oh, God knows it's Latin. Anyway, him or Calliope, during dedicated champion missions in which they explore the ruins of pre-apocalypse locations and scour for lost technology. These hunts amongst the old world ruins is a really clever story mechanic that serves to explain the gradual evolution of your high-end machinery.
Ready.
So conceptually, I absolutely love these levels. The idea that you get to step into the shoes of an individual soldier and see a close-up view of the world at ground level only serves to further enrich the backstory and also offers an unusual but welcome change in pace to the campaign experience. Society has long since fallen, so naturally these places are pretty bleak, but despite that, the locations offer an exciting glimpse at a future world and are well fleshed out, pairing nicely with the narrative elements and the visual cues of the core base building levels.
It's worth taking it.
The problem with these levels, and problem is putting it lightly, is that actually playing them can be excessively frustrating and more often than not is a tedious slog. Your character movement is clunky and responds too slowly for tactics to be relevant, so largely it comes down to patience and edging forward slowly. The main variable relating to which route you take and when to unleash any grenades you might have found to tackle the larger swarms or tougher enemies. Knowing the ideal routes to minimize risk changes everything on these levels, which is a cheap tactic on the part of the developers, requiring either multiple playthroughs or a walkthrough guide, neither of which leave me fulfilled as a player when I'm trying to test my wits and skill, not my memory. If I had a penny for every time I edged forward, I'd be a millionaire by the end of the game. After playing about half the champion levels, I did read up on them to garner a better understanding of where I was perhaps going wrong, but I hit a wall of mutual distaste. There really is little love for this part of the game, and while I absolutely applaud the makers for their attempt at giving you a close-up look at the world and enriching the experience, the actual gameplay is off target because it utilizes the same character control mechanics as your troops from the main campaign, which means it simply isn't fit for purpose. The number of research points you collect on these levels dwarf those from base building missions, and upgrading your skill tree is essential for later levels, so skipping them isn't even an option. And as well as defeating all the enemies you encounter, you need to find all the items in the level, which will usually leave you exasperated. Anything can be collectible, from a tiny bottle or book on the table through to a necklace on the floor, or any one of the dozens of boxes scattered throughout the mission, which remain visually unchanged after you find them, and so if you fail to find all the necessary points on your initial run through, a large chunk of your time will then be spent moving your pointer over the items like you're playing Broken Sword or some other 90s point-and-click adventure. Don't get me wrong, as a kid I used to love a bit of Where's Wally, or Waldo if you're American, but I didn't sign up for this when I decided to invest my time in a tactical RPG. If and when a sequel comes about, I very much hope they keep these exploration missions in place, but my goodness do I hope they find another way of tackling them, because it seemed like a last-minute and very untested addition to the game. The game does allow you to change difficulty on a level-by-level basis, so my advice would be to set the difficulty to easy and just blast your way through them for the sake of your sanity. Of the 48 missions in the game, 23 of them are the main colony building levels, and 10 of them are these tactical missions I just mentioned. Fortunately, far less frustrating than this is the third type of mission, of which there are 15, and these are Hold the Fort. These missions use the other collectible points, the Empire points, and as I understand it, they insinuate your clout and attracting mercenaries and the like to your cause, and the more points you have, the more resources at your disposal for kitting out choke points before they become overrun with enemies. These levels are actually pretty easy once you understand the specifics of the enemy types and have a secondary purpose of allowing you to practice building defenses against these enemies without having to do so at the risk of your colony in the main campaign, because your defenses failing you in the main campaign can undo hours of work. Some zombies have ranged attacks, but most are just bruisers, and so placing down barriers for protection and then a second ring of barriers to hold enemies at bay for a short while whilst you batter them with ranged weapons is an almost universally successful tactic. Other tricks like bottlenecking the enemies and using unbreakable terrain is obvious when trying to preserve resources, but despite being relatively easy, it always got my heart going when I hit the start button and sat back with some trepidation to see if my troops would outlive the onslaught. In some way, these missions live up to the game's title more than the main campaign. The thing is, this game is priced like that of an indie game, about £15 British or $20 US, so I don't think it's fair to lament over the lack of top-notch cinematics or a riveting storyline, not when the priority should be the building of an original game with balanced gameplay, which for the most part this game absolutely nails. Games these days are going for just disgusting amounts. I keep seeing crazy packages online for up to and over £100. I mean, when did a game become the same price as an airline ticket? When you consider that you'll get as many, if not more hours out of this than a mainstream game, I feel almost guilty for listing my frustrations, but in truth, the game is so good that despite its low price tag, it rubs shoulders with the best, and as a result, it'll be treated as such. There are other frustrations, which include slightly weird right or left click choices when assigning units to guard towers or patrol. You can't use extra buttons on your mouse without third-party software. When playing on my 2-screen setup, the mouse would move off the game and onto the free screen, so begrudgingly I would turn off the second screen in display settings before playing. Not ideal, but not the end of the world. The voice acting is dubious at best. It kind of reminded me of House of the Dead at times.
My friends from the AMS, it's me, Goldman.
The script is a little bit made for TV, and the cutscenes look better suited to one of those games that you see pop up when you scroll through social media feeds. But again, like I said, I presume it was all done on a budget, and to be genuinely fair on the developers, it does do the job well enough. The game on a whole is at its best when it creates tension. On the whole, the fort missions this occurs pretty much every time, but on the colony building levels it depends on the level. One good example is a particular level where you have to secure a relatively safe peninsula, but also block the entrance to this epic ancient bridge from, surprise surprise, an incoming horde. It makes the map step up because it's catering to a more bespoke experience, designed entirely for this particular story mission, and gives you a sense of urgency as you build up your colony. The maps are mostly variations on a theme, so the inclusion of a specific and memorable location and an upcoming event gives the level more purpose. It's not the only example, and I won't spoil the others, but it's worth noting that some maps are more exhilarating than others based on their unique scenarios. The game seems to put a lot of precedence on score, stamping them onto the screen and highlighting the impact of your failure in red, something I think I saw a lot. Based on the popularity of the game in Japan, a country famous for its love of highly challenging games, this probably works in the game's favour. But personally, I'm wholeheartedly here for the experience, and my scores often left me feeling like I've been slapped in the face by a wet fish. But if you do feel the same way, then take note that none of that means anything unless you want to show your friends how, freaking cool you are, because the scores don't actually impact the number of points that you earn in regards to upgrading your skill tree and so on. As long as you scrape by the skin of your teeth, then you're good. To conclude, I'll say this. Tactically demanding real-time strategy games such as They Are Billions usually provide two types of crowds. You'll have those that like to play on easier settings where the game caters to the base building crowd, a more relaxed experience prioritizing the creative side of the game, and providing a challenge that can be managed alongside if played sensibly. And then you get the harder settings for the hardcore players, the ones who like to compare their scores and hone their skills to a razor edge. The thing about They Are Billions is it doesn't really have an offering for the first. It's just hard or friggin' insane. Each level can take hours, and a tiny slip up means repeating the entire thing from scratch, which takes some serious dedication on the part of the player, I can tell you. So why then, despite usually being one of the base building players looking for a relaxed experience, did I find myself coming back again and again until I completed the game? Well, the answer is, it's just that good. The relentless punishment for making tiny mistakes will make you a better player. Once you reach the later levels, the earlier parts of the game become almost laughably easy despite making you pull your hair out when you played them at the time. Much of the amusement doesn't come from the variety of methods to complete your objective, such as civilization with religion versus armies, or Age of Empires with the different cultures and their subsequent assets, or even XCOM where you can take physically different routes through the map which totally flips the experience. The amusement in They Are Billions comes simply from building something magnificent, getting it right, and walking away with another win under your belt. The novelty of redoing the map again and again can wear a little thin, but usually you have more than one map available to you at a time, and so trying a different level will counter that frustration considerably. If perhaps you have a smaller budget to work with when buying games, or you'd like something memorable from which you'll definitely get your money's worth, or you just really like that steampunk vibe with the chugging gears and the puffing smoke all wrapped up in a post-apocalyptic base building package, then for sure this game might be for you. But if you're a casual gamer, someone who enjoys a more relaxed experience and prioritizes creativity over difficulty, then you might want to look elsewhere. Games like Dark Souls, Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, Cuphead, Super Meat Boy, Hollow Knight and so on have all been building on a trend of extremely challenging experiences over the last few years, and They Are Billions nestles itself nicely amongst those titles. It's not that the game requires lightning-fast reactions or razor-sharp motor skills, but more that it requires dedication and the preparedness to repeat the same experience time and time again without giving up. I outlined its issues and also how you can mitigate them if you're inclined to, because I'm keen for others to experience the best of the game like I did, but just don't walk into this game thinking that you're going to stroll through it, otherwise you might blink and find it's taken a stroll right through you and wandered off with your sanity.